But so my name is Spencer Stewart. I'm the chair of the Alcuin Society, and so before we get underway, the society was founded in 1965, and it's the only nonprofit organization in Canada dedicated to the entire range of interests related to books and reading. So, and 4 of the society's journals is published 3 times per year and covers topics that include authorship, publishing, book design, production, the history of the book, libraries. The list really goes on: calligraphy, illustration, marbling. To further its aims, the society engages in a wide range of educational activities, such as this evening's conversation, workshops, exhibitions, field visits, and many in collaboration with educational institutions across the country, including Simon Fraser, UBC, Emily Carr, and others. The Alcuin Society's annual awards for the excellence in book design in Canada is the only national award, a competition of its kind that recognizes and celebrates the art of the book design in Canada. And winners of this award represent the nation in an international exhibition and competitions at Frankfurt and Leipzig at their various book fairs. And the Society also offers a Robert R. Reed Award and Medal to recognize lifetime achievement and extraordinary contributions to the book arts in Canada. And so, if you're not yet a member, we of course encourage you to consider it. And I'll put a link in the chat this evening for you to take a look at it. And as well, of course, the lecture series that we've been doing for 2021 couldn't have happened without Gina Page, who's been organizing this and inviting the various speakers. So really a thank you goes out to her. And yeah, now I'll hand it over to Andrew and Wesley to have a conversation. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, they've made sure to kind of open it up at the end to conversation. So please put your questions in the chat, and I'll come back on and make sure that we get to those questions. But without further ado, I will turn off the video and hand it over to you two. And yeah, great. Thank you so much for coming together this evening. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Spencer. Yeah. Have you got the timer on, Andrew?
Have I got the what?
Timer on?
Oh, I've got the timer. Yeah, yeah. So before we start, my good friend Bob Snyder, who was a busker in Toronto for years, but lives down in Bear River, he was part of the Dreadnought press crowd that ended up down here in Nova Scotia at one point, just an old hippie. And he always likes to say, we published a book that he did about performing, and he always says, tell them what you're going to do, tell them what you're doing, tell them what you did. So,
yeah. Right, there you go.
What we're going to do, when the Alcuin Society asked if I would give a talk, I volunteered that sounded boring to me. And then standing in a room talking at a screen, just, it doesn't have a lot of charm to it. And I thought, why don't Wes and I talk? Why don't Wes and I do a talk together? And I'm thankful that they were so receptive to the idea. And I think it's spread a little bit. I think they modified some of their other plans when they saw that idea. So I'm delighted to be here with my good friend Wesley Bates tonight. And we decided to introduce each other because we wanted not a list of achievements or whatever, but just the real stuff. And so this is my friend Wesley Bates, and he's in Clifford, Ontario. He grew up, all kinds of places in Canada because his father was a Mountie. And they moved around a lot. And he studied fine art at Mount Allison. He's a master of timing, which you'll know if you've ever played music with him. And so his timing was that he went to study with Alex Colville, and Alex Colville left the year before he showed up.
He didn't leave town. He was still there.
Yeah, stopped teaching.
Yeah.
But, Wes has really made his name. Painting is where he really got going, but he's really made a name for himself as an illustrator and as a wood engraver. And I just admire his work. He's one of the, one of the living legends of wood engraving in my book. So I'm glad, and a good friend, great musician.
Right.
Okay, get my introduction out of the way, Wes.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for that, Andrew. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Steeves. Andrew is one of the enfants terribles of the fine press and the art press, and what's the small press world, so-called, in the hierarchy of things. And I've since I met Andrew for the first time, it's always been not a game of catch up, but you can't sit when you're with Andrew because he's on the move all the time. And I just love telling people that how did a guy with his first degree in criminology get involved as a book designer and publisher? I've since found out that he has several degrees and in the English area, but his acumen as a designer, and when it comes to the Alcuin Awards, he's probably the most awarded person that the Alcuin Society has ever had to deal with. I used to get a free meal every year and receive a fistful of awards at the Alcuin Society in Toronto, and I've always been grateful of the nourishment. Anyway, Andrew, I think, has he's taken up the mantle from people like Stan Bevington and Tim Inkster, and there'll be other people that I probably don't remember or don't remember right now, but the fine press and the small press world are moving forward, in my opinion, with great thanks to Andrew and what he's doing. And there you have it, Andrew Steeves.
Yeah, and maybe maybe a good place to start, Wes, is to talk a little bit about how we met. My memory is it's John Terpstra, the poet. Yep. John Terpstra in Hamilton put us together. Yep. And John and I came up to your studio and looked around, and I mean, this is before I had started the press at that point, and I was doing trade publishing, but we weren't doing our own printing yet. We were just on the cusp of making that leap. We were doing bindery and things like that. I wasn't doing any letterpress work yet, and we came up and hung out in your studio. And in fact, I don't want to give the wrong impression that I'm an organized person who keeps notes and things, but there are moments in my life, I'm like sort of a chickadee undulating with journal keeping up and down. And so it just so happens that the period in my life when I met you, I did take notes. And I actually have like a whole page of scrawl.
Oh, that's not a scroll, that's beautiful.
September of 1999, when I met you. I want to read just a little bit of it because it's entertaining. Okay. And I start right in with the details. Wesley Bates, underlined, had a proofing press, a challenge, which he said was a way to go for letterpress work. He said packing was important and never to pack higher than what was flush with the edges of the cylinder. So it goes on with a bunch of just little bit, whatever you were rambling on to me about, I was like taking in, because I knew this was the destiny I wanted, but I didn't have a press yet.
Right, yeah.
But after a bunch of this stuff, you tell me about, and I can sort of read between the lines now, but I wrote down things like there's a couple in New York that cast type, which is clearly the Bixlers,
Right, yeah, yeah.
And you gave me advice on getting type, and
yeah.
And then at the, towards the end of it, I write that you were West Meadow Press, and is a wonderful old 5 and dime store building on Main Street with a brick face, odd Gothic brickwork, and stained glass windows. West made a great lunch. Sandwiches and homemade soup.
Yeah, as I remember, that lunch turned into went into the evening, because I remember us sitting up on the little deck we have on the flat roof and watching the bats come out of the fascia before you and John took off. Yeah, we should say too that John is a a highly regarded and awarded poet who lives in Hamilton, and I think he's had several books published by you. And
we've basically been his main publisher since that moment.
That's right. Yes, and John was by here just a little while ago and gave me a copy of his newest one. Well, what I remember about us is this young fellow showing up, and John, I think, you must have said something to him about wanting to print or something like that, and that's why he said, "Let's go see Wesley." I was I was flattered, but I was also very nervous because you know, I've only got so much I can tell you about printing. I make wood engravings, and I can print wood engravings, and I think I'm pretty good at that. But anyway, it didn't take very much to get your fire lit, because it wasn't long, and I heard from you that somebody had you'd come across a flatbed Heidelberg cylinder press. And I thought, holy smokes, this guy's he's going places. I remember that as being quite a big. That's a fabulous story too. That isn't that the one you found in the shed, and the guy didn't really understand what it was and just wanted it gone.
We were buying our first offset press, so a lot happened in that small period of time.
Yeah.
And Gary and I had gone into a commercial printer in Halifax that we knew and we dealt with off and on through the our early years.
Yeah.
And they had an old Adast perfecting, two-color press. Mm-hmm. And Adasts are like the Sea King helicopters of presses. I mean, they're just the amount of downtime relative to how they fly was just not a good ratio. But we didn't know that. And we spent probably more money than we'd spent on any piece of equipment then or since.
Yeah.
But it was the leap. And Gary and I sat, and we went and looked at this press, and we then went and sat at Tim Hortons.
Yeah.
And we just kind of like, well, what do you think? And neither of us would have done it on our own, but because he didn't look quite worried enough, and I didn't look quite worried enough, we both kind of took courage from each other, and we jumped, and that changed everything. And when we went to pick up that press, Wes, was when, we're scoping out the move, and I look, and under a pile of boxes is this Vandercook 219. And I said, "Oh, you've got a Vandercook." And he said, "Yeah, you want it? Put it on the truck. Get it out of here." and I built, that press has built my career.
Yeah, right. Is that the one you've had in your office?
That's the one that was in my office.
I'd like all the people listening to know that, as far as I'm, in my experience at any rate, you're the only publisher who actually has a press within arm's reach of your desk in your office. And I think that's pretty darn cool. That's pretty darn cool. Yeah.
It was shortly after that you and I got together to work on George Eliot Clark's execution poems.
That's right. Yeah.
To do an engraving.
And that's such a powerful book. That collection is really powerful. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a lot in short order. We started doing our own printing. I started into letterpress. I produced George Eliot Clark's, the first letterpress book I did was the biggest sheet that fit in the press.
That's going to say, you should tell people how big that book is.
It's 12 by 18 inches, it's gigantic.
It doesn't fit in anybody's bookcase.
No, but it's such a large story of these two brothers who were executed for theft and murder. Mm-hmm. These two black men in Fredericton, who were, I think, the last hanging in Fredericton, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And they were cousins of George Eliot Clark's. And so he tells the story, really ahead of, it resonates in the moment we're in currently. But, it tells the story of these two young men who, were responsible for that heinous act, but also were the product of, centuries of mistreatment of Black people. Yeah. So it was just an incredible thing. And so I was so glad that you came on board and did this wonderful engraving of a noose and a hammer, which plays an important role in the
noose and a hammer and a whip.
Yeah.
The whip in there too. Yeah. No, I remember that. That was it was hard to read those poems, but also quite how would you put it? was enthralled by reading them. I'm trying to avoid the word thrilled, but enthralled by them because they're so powerful, and the emotion that comes through is amazing.
Yeah, it was the first thing that we did with George Eliot Clarke, and we've
Mhm.
Since done a lot of books with George Eliot Clarke,
Mhm, mhm.
including reissuing work of his. That's the only letterpress project we did with George, but and on the trade publishing side, we've done a lot with George. And
Mhm.
I have to say that of all of George's work, before and since that book, he's done nothing that has the sort of clarity of voice and focus. I mean, George is an incredible character. He's just all like I look like a wilt, like I'm quiet compared to George.
Well,
He's a spring,
I got to tell you, when every once a couple of years ago they had a book arts fair at the Fisher Rare Books Library in Toronto, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to go. And there's some beautiful presses there, do great work. And there's a certain hum that happens when an audience gets in and they're milling around and talking to everybody. But all of a sudden, the tone of the room changed. It just literally, it didn't falter. It kind of came to a very slow, graceful stop. And I looked around to see what was happening. It took me a minute or two to feel it. And it was that George Eliot Clarke had entered the room. He hadn't started talking to anybody yet. He just had come in the room, and the whole place changed. And I'm not kidding. It was amazing. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an apocryphal story because George Eliot Clarke never stops talking.
Well, he had come in the room and he was looking for somebody, I think. And it was probably George Walker, who wanted to talk to, I suppose, or somebody like that. Anyway, the place noticed him. Anyway, it was an interesting experience.
It's a real powerful thing. I mean, as an illustrator on your part, and as a typographer and book designer on my part, I mean, our job is largely to sort of sit quiet and just make things work. And
That's
if
right.
we do our job right, the things that we make have the kind of inevitability about them of an Appalachian folk song. They're not supposed to really be, a grackle brash. They're supposed to be, just chickadee quiet. Like,
Well,
so
that's a neat. That's an analogy. That's an interesting analogy that you made there, because how would you put it? It's polished, but it isn't polished because it wants to be shiny. It's polished because it wants to be real. It wants to be just full of the reality of what's going on. I think that's a nice. And you had something you were saying the other day about a North Star, which we'll get to later, but you've got a lot of those.
Well, you got time to think when you're under press, Wes.
Yeah, that's true. Isn't that the nice? Now, just thinking about that too, that's one of the lovely things about printing. I mean, I just love multiples of something. And when you get printing, it is like 3 hours can go away or evaporate in no time at all. Once you get the rhythm and you get the inking situation right for every block, in my case, is different. And same with yours, with the amount of surface and all that stuff. But once that starts to go, and you just get this beautiful rhythm going. And there, when I bought my first press, which was a Chandler and Price 1015, it was in relatively good shape. My friend Farrell Boyce and I had to readjust the cam because there was a little slip, so we're getting a slur. So he found a gear puller and we took it apart. But anyway, the idea of having the power of the press was a big deal to me at the time. And I was going to be doing editions of 300 of everything, just because I had a press. But I've since learned that that's not the rhythm I like, because that's slavery on what I've got. The idea of printing, getting the right amount of ink, and just that sweetness of the time period of it has always been a pleasure to me.
Everybody does find the kind of like interval that makes sense for them, I think, in terms of their audience, but also in terms of their own physical interest in the work. And I do find like the common, you know, when I don't know that I could be a normal publisher that sits at a desk and goes to lunch and things like that. I think it would drive me nuts. I would be bad at it. But what has kept me engaged and thrilled here has been the balance between the intellectual work and the physical work, because it reminds me of where I come from and what I am, you know, in my bones. Like, you know, it's, you know, it's no different than haying. It's no different than cutting wood. You know, it has this kind of your mind is occupied, but there is also space. There's rhythm, you know, and you're able to kind of think. You know, I can't remember who I was talking to someone recently. We were talking about cutting wood, and I said that at the size of the gas tank on a chainsaw is the perfect size, because it's not so long, so big a tank that you cut till you get distracted and get hurt. You have to keep stopping. You have to keep stopping and you refill the tank, and you file the chain. And as you're doing that, the world is present. You know, you're not just in the muffs all day because you have to stop all the time. And printing has that same kind of rhythm, you know, that same kind of partial preoccupation and partial freedom of your mind. It's just wonderful.
And those moments of like the goal is to cut a tree down or print a book or to print a wood engraving and so on. But those moments of taking care of the things that make it happen, like sharpening. I mean, I know I have a great fondness and a you know, you need to have a desire for sharpness in order to cut a tree down, and also to print, because and to design. The side issue, which often people don't really think about. They just think they just want, you know, to make marks and then think. But the sharpness, the acuteness of your attention to detail and all those things in there are the same kind of thing, aren't they? And our good friend Gray down in Kentucky, Gray Zeitz at Larkspur Press, he put out a book of poetry called No Time Lost in the Wedding. And he's absolutely right in that. And whenever I've had a student here or so on, I always tell them that, you know, I can show you how to hold the tools and we can work on making lines. But I said, the thing you really need a few days to learn is how to sharpen the tools. And then, you know, then you're off on your own because you can keep them sharp. So that's a really neat thing. And I should just tell people too, who are that one of the things I admire about what you're doing in your life is that your the way that you take on your home life, which is not in the general run of things, is the way that you've taken on your publishing life and your design life, is that your how would you put it, really back to basics. Could I say that? And I also love it that when you guys, when your business, you and your business partner Gary, have to have a high level executive meeting, you guys go on a canoe trip, you know, for a few days. I think that is such a cool thing. That's how you work out how the business is going to work. You go off and camping for 2 or 3 days, puttering along a river and building your own fires and cooking things over a fire. You know, that's great.
I don't know why it surprises people why I take an interest in my being present in my own life. You know, you know, but it does seem in some ways a revolutionary act to actually, you know, be invested in your own life. And you know, we built my wife Karen and I built an off-grid house about 12 years ago. And when I say built it, I mean built it.
Built it, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to hiring it out. And you know, one of the things that surprised my father, you know, who should have known better, should have known me well enough after all these years, but he just couldn't understand why I wanted to make my life harder, why I wanted to do this work. And I can't imagine, like Gary and I got into the printing side of publishing because it just seemed weird to give all the fun parts to someone else and pay them to do it, you know. When we could do them in-house, you know, both control the quality and the cost and have the joy of being at the very center of the thing we were doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the other things that I remember very clearly from that visit, that first visit to your shop, was very important in my learning how to see. And that was that I commented to you, you know, I'd come up drawing, and so I thought I wanted to be a political cartoonist when I was in my, you know, early teens and so on.
Yeah.
And I loved journalism and newspapers, so drawing was something I was very familiar with. But here's this guy, you know, engraving, you know, backwards and not drawing the black part, but drawing the white part, and I said something to you, you know, like, how do you do this? Like, how does you get your brain wrapped around? And you just sort of leisurely pointed out your back window of the shop, where, being in Amish and Mennonite country, you know, there just happened to be a horse tied up, you know, on the back fence posts of your property. And you said, look at the light on the horse's back. Now draw the light. Do the, you know, draw the light, you know. And I just like, it was one of those moments where it just blew up in my head. And the other thing was that you had an engraving that you'd done for your Roots to the Earth, I think it's called, project with Wendell Berry.
Right, yeah.
On your wall. And you showed it to me, and I said words that I now can't even fathom saying. But I said to you, who's Wendell Berry? And you told me about this Kentucky farmer and poet named Wendell Berry that, you know, worked with your friend Gray.
Yeah.
And you talked about, you know, alternative approaches to, you know, really old approaches to agriculture that weren't just, you know, till the shit out of everything. And and everything you said to me, I said, well, that makes sense. Well, of course, isn't that what everyone does, you know? But Wendell went on to become an incredible influence on the press here, and on our thinking about, you know, agriculture became the metaphor for how we think about what we are, like how we work, what our responsibility to our community is. Right, absolutely. And then, you know, Wendell, of course, has gone on to have an impact. You know, they may not sort of know it directly, but on my kids. I mean, my oldest son is farming sheep, and I'm sure no small part of it.
I think it's wonderful.
You and Wendell, right?
Yeah, and my daughter too. I mean, it's probably only fair to point out for people who maybe don't know Wendell, that know Wendell Berry's work, is that he wrote a book called The Unsettling of America, which was triggered in sort of the essence of people moving away from the land and into the cities, as opposed to people moving from the east of the United States to the west and moving the farming across. Once the farming got to the West Coast, then people started to leave the farms and go into cities. And I mean, that's not what the book is about, but that's kind of why he made that title, I think. And
it's about the erosion of rural places and rural work, you know, in the post-war era.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. And Wendell's writing has been basically a very elaborate and persistent filling out and expanding on that whole idea that it's about place that makes civilization stable, not and the place that people know and love and care for is what makes civilization strong. And we both have been affected by him. I moved to Clifford because of my interest in Wendell's work. I mean, I grew up in the small towns in southern Saskatchewan. You know, if I had been a really good baseball player, I could have thrown a baseball from the center of Gull Lake out into a farmer's field. Wasn't that big a town, and so my a priori experiences, so to speak, are about land and farming. And even though I've never been a farmer, and when I moved up here, actually I had come to the understanding I was never going to be a farmer, but I moved here with my feet. I voted with my feet. I'm going to the rural because I want to be in the rural. And so that's why I'm living in a little town of less than 1,000 people, I think, still. And
Yeah, me too. And
yeah.
it's funny because Wendell didn't influence those choices in the same way that, say, Stan Bevington or Tim Inkster didn't influence my choice of
Right.
the Heidelberg Press or any of these other things.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
in the same way, as I was trying to invent my place in the world, when I looked up from that work,
yeah.
the people that I saw that were doing something familiar, were, on printing, it was Tim and Stan,
Yeah.
at Porcupine Quill and Coach House, and
Mhm.
and it was people like Gray Zeitz, doing letterpress the way that I think letterpress should be done at
Mhm.
Larkspur Press in Kentucky, and it,
Mhm.
and and it was people like Alda Leopold and Wendell Berry who had already written all the things that I was thinking and gave voice to them. And it was heartening. It was heartening to discover that you're not alone in the things that you are cobbling together out of your own history, out of
Right.
your own past. Because
Yeah, and
my grandfather farmed, but my parents were normal, people who just, lived out of the grocery store and that kind of stuff.
right, yeah,
And so, I've gone my life better. I'm not a big farmer. I'm more of a forestry guy, but
yeah,
I don't own a refrigerator. Like I live more like my grandfather did growing up than I do like my parents. And
yeah,
and some of that's
yeah.
by accident, and some of it's by choice. But
Talking about refrigerators, a quick story. We have some friends who are Amish that live in we have a lot of Amish people in our area, and Mennonites too, but the Amish are the ones that, mostly the horse and buggy people. The Mennonites in this area are what they call mechanized Mennonites.
mechanics.
And anyway, they have everything. But this fellow, he's a bishop in his community. He has 12 children. So every day at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there are 14 mouths to feed. And one day he approached me and he says, would it be do you have room in your basement for two freezers? And I said, well, I've never really needed a second freezer. And he says, well, if you had one, would it be possible for me to borrow it? So, I mean, it was such a roundabout way to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, the long and short of it is, we have an Amish fellow who has to have some assistance for getting things done. So they've got the big freezer in the basement. We have a medium-sized one, and they work so hard to keep that thing full. It's amazing. But so we kind of like that. We're sort of guerrilla freezing.
You're the gateway drug
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
to modern amenities.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wes, we've been going about half an hour, so why don't we talk for a few minutes about projects that we're currently working on,
Okay.
and then maybe move over to questions after that.
Good idea.
So that we can actually talk about what people want to hear instead of what we would talk about if they weren't here.
Okay. All right. Well, sure.
So what are you working on, Wes?
Well, right now I'm finishing up a project for Gray at Larkspur Press, and it's the first time I've ever done a children's book. And the book, the title is Mr. Poof, and he happens to be a little Dutch mouse who has the glory of having invented butter. And by one night in the dark of the night, falling into a big bowl of milk and swimming all night long, churning it into butter. And he gets awarded a big medal by the prince of the land, wherever it might be. So I think the land is not defined. And I have one full engraving to finish and one just about done. So, and then all 19 engravings. It started off, Gray had designed the book originally to have 4 engravings in it. And so I sent him the sketches for the first 4. And then I sent him 3 little sort of portrait sketches of the mouse in different situations in the book. And I said, if this is going to be for kids, we need to have some small images of the mouse, just to show the kids the mouse. And he showed it to his client. And then they came back and said, well, now we need 19 engravings. So that turned into a really big project for me. So it's been a long one. And the other thing I've been working on is, and this has been on the burner for a long time, is a wordless novel, which I'm still I'm at the second draft stage before I start engraving. So that's what I hope to get at. And then recently I just finished a book for HarperCollins by John McLean, the son of Norman McLean, who wrote A River Runs Through It. And then we did, Tim and Alka published a book by a friend of mine and I on fly fishing. So that's been my recent stuff. How about you?
Well, first I'm going to say that the astute observer will notice that there are no Wesley Bates engravings in any Gaspereau Press projects in this calendar year. And that's because of collusion on the part of Gray Zeitz and I.
Yeah, right. I get it.
Gray and I became friends because Wes was engraving for me and Wes was engraving for Gray. And he would tell Gray about this. I know this guy in Canada, you really should know. And he'd tell me, I know this guy in Kentucky that you really should know.
Yeah, that's right.
So finally, I just went, Gray's like me, he hates to travel, but I was down to see Amos Kennedy when he was in Alabama. And on the way home, I swung up the inside of the Appalachians and I went to see Gray. And ever since, we've been pretty tight.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So when I called Gray up and says, so what's going on? He says, well, I got, Wesley doing 19 engravings. I thought, well, can't mess with that. So I'll wait till next year.
Yeah.
But as far as my own work, this time of year is always very busy on the trade publishing side of what we do here. So, we've got 6 new trade titles coming out this fall, and 3 are through the press, and 3 are nearing the press. So that's I've been pulling my hair out with that and busy writing catalog copy and things like that, which I always do at the back end of the job as opposed to the front end.
Right.
And much like jackets and covers and title pages, I always do those last.
Yeah.
And but on the letterpress side, I've got a number of fun things in the hopper. One is my I've been doing I got some wonderful Marvin paper from Gemma Lewis in England.
Wow.
For me, but this is my edition of Gerard Manley Hopkins' poems, Pied Beauty, which is all set in 3-inch tall, phrase by phrase, wood type.
That's going to be wonderful. Yeah,
it's both like on one level is obnoxious. Victorian would not have approved, but also is like when you think about this, like the punchiness of that sprung rhythm that he used to write with, like it's appropriate. Like it has this impact as you sort of. And I don't know anyone else who's ever turned a sonnet into 48 pages of text, but
well,
anyway.
I tell people a little bit about the background about that type. Give them an idea of, maybe some of the folks don't know.
Well, that type is really meant to say things like war and famine.
Of course it is.
It would have been used in that context, but that particular phonotype would come from Glenn Galuska's collection in Montreal when Glenn died and handed his type along here.
Yeah.
But what's really funny about that project is sounds ridiculous, but it came to me in a dream. In that I have a volume of Hopkins's poetry, which I encountered Hopkins's poetry in high school, as many people did. And at that point, I didn't give a crap about reading poetry, and I didn't think it was useful in any way. I thought it was just something I had to get through. Like,
and then you became a
like
poet.
oatmeal. Well, right, exactly. Be careful what you mock. Your fate awaits. But when I encountered that poem, it was probably the first and only poem, other than maybe a little Shakespeare, that I encountered all the way through high school, where I thought, man, there's something going on here. There's maybe there's something to this, and because here's this Jesuit writing about this the natural world around him in a way that resonated with me, a feral person who spent most of their time outdoors or looking out the window wishing they were outdoors, and so it left that impact. And then years later, after graduating with 2 degrees in English, I found a volume of the collected poems of Hopkins that had belonged to one of my teachers at university who had died. And that's how I found out. As we often do, we've lost our friends when we buy their libraries.
Yeah. Oh, there's a good one.
So I took it home, and that book basically lives on my bedside table. I'll often end up back, in that kind of like just before drifting off to sleep, 11 o'clock at night, thumbing through that book and rereading bits of Hopkins. And as I read Pied Beauty through that night and put it down and kind of drifted off to sleep, as I was just losing consciousness, I thought about, the idea of setting that poem in 3-inch tie wood type. And because I always had avoided setting it, because the world doesn't need another pretty little version of some Victorian poem. Like, it's just, fine. I mean, anyone can do that. And it's lovely in its own way, but it just wasn't interesting. Yeah. So the idea of like I think, yelling it from the rooftops and through.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so we've had a good fun with that. I'm just starting to sew it now and bind it.
Wow, that is cool. Speaking of binding, that's the fishing book that Robert Reed and I did. He wrote it, and I did some 40 engravings for it. I'm going to be binding the special edition, and since you got to show and tell, I'm going to do one, if I may. This is the this is going to be the centerfold of the fishing book. Can you see that? Am I getting it there? Yeah. But there won't be any white spaces. When they're printed, it'll be one long image. And I've never done an engraving this size before, but so that's about 80% done. There's a little bit more work to do. And then that'll go as a fold out in the book. And we're using the original text block from the Porcupine's Quill Press. But I'm going to bind it hardcover with this engraving and 2 others tipped in or sewn in. And we've got King, oh geez, I've forgotten his first name now. That's terrible. Mr. Kingwell from University of Toronto.
Mark, is it Mark?
Mark Kingwell, thank you so much. That's, now I'm not quite as embarrassed, but anyway, Mark Kingwell has written us a really interesting introduction. And then we're going to do the colophon, and you're going to print them for us on the same paper that Tim uses, so we can bind them all in together. It's going to be a really cool job. But that's going to be my new thing. I've been watching your videos about binding, or your photographs about binding, so it's going to be my big. I've done some binding before, but this is going to be my my big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find. Well, Will Reuter and Gray Zeitz certainly were big influences on me on finally making the leap. Because I run a trade shop, when I do trade books, I do my part, and then it hands down the line, and it's 3 steps away. It's not hard to keep an eye on it, but I'm not doing every piece. And one of the things I really love about the limited edition books I do is that they are, until they're ready to sell, nobody else in here has anything to do with them or really even knows what's going on. And then I'll hand them over to Gary and say, see if you can find readers for these.
Well, you're the one you did of the Shakespeare Dogberry charges the guard. That you did a spectacular job on that. The binding and then the printing the book and everything is also very good, but nicely done. And the slipcase.
Well, and it was great. That was a great engraving too. It's just the kind of trouble I enjoy getting up to you, where I call you up with an idea and kind of explain it in my roundabout way.
Yeah.
And to see whether it catches anything on fire, And in that case, it definitely did. So,
yeah.
Well, that's about 40 minutes, okay. Wes.
Okay, there we go.
Looks like there's lots of questions popping up. Why don't we bring Spencer back in to moderate?
All right.
And then we can just answer what people want to hear about.
Sure. Do our best.
Well, we do. Andrew, you're absolutely right. There are some questions that have come in, so I'll pitch them to you too, and you'll work with them from there. I'm just going to go in order of their appearance. I think that's probably the best way to work. But we've got one here that came in, and it's can you talk about how this one's specifically to Wesley, and can you talk about how you arrive at the images? Does Andrew, as the designer, make suggestions, or do the images emerge from your read of the text? Do you involve the author in the process?
Well, so it's yes to all of those, actually. The way Andrew works, which is a real treat, and some of the other publishers, including Gray Zeitz and anyway, some other ones. It's David Godine, for instance, at Godine Press in Boston is similar too. He sends the text, and then we phone. I read it. I have a chance to read it, and then Andrew, for instance, will have some ideas that he sends with the text. And then often I've had the opportunity to talk with the author about when I've got some sketches done, to send it to the author and have some feedback from the author. And that is, from the point of view of an illustrator, that's fun, because you know, the illustrators ride in the caboose, and the author and the publisher up in the bar car, you know, so on that train. But it's really fun to have that kind of thing. And speaking about having fun talking with an author, when we were doing another project with George Eliot Clark, I mean, talk about a fun time talking to somebody. Like, George is a very lively guy, and it's kind of fun to talk with him. But Andrew's always been really good about having a starting point, or a notion that he feels might work, and then we go from there. That's always nice. From the illustrator's point of view, it's you know, the illustrations are in service to the text, and so and what I find is that what I try to do as an illustrator is to think of the text as like a long picket fence, and all picket fences are missing a board or two, right? So that board, that empty space, is maybe an opportunity to add something to the text that doesn't step on or over elaborate something that the author has designed or has created through the words. You don't want to overdo that stuff, but you can put things into books, into an illustration that go sideways from the main track, and that I think is when illustration gets really interesting.
And we've sometimes had to reel in on really good ideas when the author, you know, freaks out at, like, you know, seeing an illustration that isn't what's they're living with in their head.
That's right.
And,
Yeah. It doesn't work with
really very reasonable. It's not prima donna like or anything. It's just like it's always this sort of navigation that, you know, you kind of, I don't know, maybe I'll go away from a canoe metaphor and go to the border collie metaphor, because I mean, my job is to get everyone safely through the gate, right? And have a good result, include the illustrator and the author. And so you're kind of doing this dance, you know, between where you're trying to pitch things that you know will succeed, but will also be accomplishable, because the author doesn't know what Wes is capable of, and you know, and can, you know, potentially constrain him too much, or so you try not to sort of get cornered, so that Wes has room to kind of like just pull something out of his pocket that, you know, nobody imagined. So well, it is a border collie kind of activity.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a good analogy. Just to give you an idea of what I'm, you know, the ambience of a place that might be in a story, for instance. The author is writing about the characters that are passing through this. So there's not a lot of explaining or description of the place. So with a bit of research and things, like I'm going to mention a book that I did for Larkspur Press, and it was by Ed McClanahan. It was about an acrobat who did acrobatics on the street as a busker kind of thing. And so it was about busy streets, and he didn't describe the buildings at all. He just named the town. So fortunately for the internet, I could find the town, and I found, you know, I populated the street with characters, and, you know, the layabouts and the passing by mothers with babies. And I added a dog to the situation, because dogs are fun, because the body language speaks, you know, very quite well. And I got a note from Ed to say, damn it, I wish I'd put a dog in my story. So, sometimes you add something that the author does like, really. Yeah, there you go.
We have another question here, although I maybe you guys can think about this a little bit for the end, but just think about it. Are there some projects that you have discussed amongst each other that you've not yet gotten to, but they keep emerging as something that you would want to work on?
Okay, we'll think about that.
Yeah. So I have one here for Andrew here. How much of the work of the press do you and Gary do yourselves, i.e., when you hire out, delegate, collaborate? Does it vary from project to project? Curious about both printing and also the other parts of running a publishing house.
It's pretty. We don't make paper very often. We don't make our own inks, and pretty much everything else we're doing in-house. If we have to do like high-end photo reproduction on glossy sheets or in color, we'll job that out, because our old Heidelberg presses they're capable of the work, but it's not really what they do best. So, but other than that, I mean, I use an external proofreader, but other than that, the editorial is happening in-house. There's really just Gary and I and 2 part-timers. So essentially, it's when I say that the trade publishing part is different because I don't get to do as much of it. The difference is actually very small, because Gary and I pretty much are doing all of it.
Do you feel that with the press, have there been different stages in the development of the press? Like, do you feel like there were real changes at certain points? Like, you have the canoe trips that you mentioned where you have your board meetings around a fire, but there must be stuff that's you're kind of changing on the fly. Do you remember sort of a time where things started to change?
Absolutely. In the early days, we looked at, say, a press like Coach House, which had staff on the editorial side, especially more than one person. And we tried different configurations. We at one point in the early 2000s had 9 people working here. And at that time, this is when Chapters Indigo still seemed to be selling books at an elevated level, and which turned out to be a shell game. When most publishers in the country got thousands of books shipped back, in a short period of time, but from Chapters Indigo, and sales that you thought you made, decisions you made for your business that were based on, oh, look, there's a market, where suddenly it was like the rug being pulled up underneath you. So, about 2008, 2009, we made major changes, and we made a decision to try to work to scale it to to the right level that it was sustainable, and making that the priority. And really, for us, that's about 4 or 5 people would be possible, and about 12 trade books a year. And so that was a real lesson. And but since that time, we've really been probably on a more steady compass bearing, where we've kind of known who we were. And even when we won big prizes, it didn't knock us off course with that. We were like, yep, that's nice. We're on this compass bearing. But so yeah, there has, that's been the big shift, was just trying to figure out that scale and what was sustainable, both economically sustainable, but also, like, I don't say spiritually, but emotionally sustainable, like what we could do, how much we could put into a day, what we could accomplish, what gave us satisfaction. And for me, the big part of that was deciding I didn't want to manage other people doing things that I love doing. I wanted to do them. So keeping the list to the size that I can do all the editorial work and all the design work, and then some portion of the execution of that work, on the press and such, like, that was important to me. And it was so much better than, say, growing to doing 20 books a year and becoming a manager, which I'm told is what I'm supposed to want, but I don't.
Let's see, we have some other questions here. Another one, it's directed at Andrew, but it expands outwards into some of the work you both do together. So Andrew, at what stage in the design of the book, trade or letterpress, do you think I need Wesley for this?
Early, very early. Yeah, very early.
there's more to this question. In the editing stage or near the end? So it's always early, you would say.
It's as I'm reading, right? So as I'm reading a book, sometimes before I've even signed the book, and I'm thinking, my God, I've got to sign this book. I'm often thinking about what kind of physical form that book takes, and not always to the level of like, this book will be in Caslin, but I am thinking about, I'm always looking for an excuse to work with Wesley. Mm-hmm. And I would be working with Wesley on almost every book, except that Wesley has, other obligations and other, I can't take up all of his time, so I look for the best things for Wesley. But we work with other illustrators. George Walker has often helped us out. Adam Smith has helped us out lately. Some Emma Fitzgerald has helped us out. It just all depends. And the other side of it is I'm really a strong advocate of typographic treatments for covers and such. And so, I mean, half of the time I don't want an illustrator. I want to use paper and color and type and form, to kind of express the things I want to express. But when I want an illustrator, the illustrator I want first is Wesley.
Yeah. Well, if I could say something, I think that's oft, or it seems to be probably more often than not, that the designer is if the designer and the printer and the small public publishers are the one and the same person, somewhat like Andrew, it often comes at the very early stage. I've received manuscripts that aren't even finished being editing and are not even finished, like I don't know what draft it might be. It might be the 10th draft or something, but I've seen manuscripts arrive and there's a note in the side and there's all kinds of marginalia written. These are photocopies of it, marginalia in there. And one of the ones was from Godine in Boston. And the editor was saying to the author, where in the blankety blank blank are you going with this? You mean, that's how early it was.
For the record, I've never written such a note to an author in my life.
That's right, but this one did, and it was really fun. And working for McClellan and Stewart too on W.O. Smith, there was still margin. I mean, the book had been
W.O. Mitchell. W.O. Mitchell.
That's W. Mitchell. I beg your pardon. Yeah, W. Mitchell. There were even editor's notes to him, like, my God, but Doug Gibson could do that to W. Mitchell. He could say things to him. But anyway, there were still marginal notes in that text too. So that was kind of fun. Yeah.
Oh, you were talking earlier about the fence, that there are these kind of spaces that you fill into. Do you dare go back and read a text again and looking back through your life and engaging with it? Do you see new spaces for images?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I do. Of course you do.
That's the project we should do, Wes. We should do a book of books, illustration we would have liked to have done for books.
Would like to have done, yeah. I think that's got to be normal. I mean, for the one thing about a project is like humane publishers like Andrew, they have a deadline in their mind, but they don't necessarily hit you over the head with it. In my case, at the beginning, right? There comes a time when there's no slack left on the reins, and that's it. You got to get the book, you got to get the engravings done. But there's always a deadline, so your impulse to get things done, get it, come up with the ideas and then get them done, are formed by the necessity of the project getting completed. So if one had 5 years to think about something, of course it would be fantastic, but
in that way it's an improvisational activity in some ways, as is design generally. I mean, I find it very painful to watch a lot of they tend to be younger designers, but I'm not sure it's an issue of youth, who like labor over like binary decisions, like labor over, should we, it's like, make a decision. Because when you make a decision, you then go down a pathway and you eliminate like 50%. And now you're making, another decision based on that pathway.
Right.
And, design and illustration has a lot of that tightrope walk aspect to it, that you're, at any moment you could ruin it to some extent, but you need to go forward.
Right. And it's
exhilarating.
I was going to say it has zest to it then too, because sometimes the spark of an illustration is, you can't overthink it. Sometimes I mean, you make a sketch, you get it approved, and in that little back and forth there, it sometimes is like, letting some of the air out of a balloon. It's not quite as buoyant as it might have been before, but if it goes back and forth too much, then it'll go flat. So you've got to have enough zip in the doodah to get the illustration approved and get it going. And the way I work is I try not to do too many, like I don't trace my images onto the block. Years ago, I figured out how you could make a photocopy transfer of a sketch. And sketches are not the final linears. It's like, I find book illustrations different for me than commercial illustrations, say for sort of cookie packages or billboards or something like that I've done commercially. I want the drawing that goes on the block to be the closest thing to the spark that made it. It gave me the idea that I could send it to Andrew and she could show it to the author. And so I work from that as close as I can, rather than labor it.
Yeah, and trying to run interference so that spark doesn't get extinguished by too much micromanagement, on the part of, like, I'm sure Wes will agree with the statement. I mean, I very rarely say, oh, no, I'd rather you did this.
No,
my answer is almost always yes with Wes. Once we've moved away from like the bigger concepts of like, we need 3 illustrations. Here's the 3 parts of the book where I thought they should go. The author seems to be on board. And that's kind of the amount of direction I'm usually giving. But trying to make it so the author, I'm kind of terse with the authors when they're looking at sketches about like, this is just a sketch. It's not going to be the same, but also, so don't get bogged down in details. Look at the momentum and the rhythm and the flow, and say yes or say no.
I've always wanted an author to say, send me some images so I can write a book for them. I've tried it a couple of times. In fact, John Terpstra, who we talked about earlier, I thought, what about, the classic idea of the 4 seasons, why don't I do 4 engravings and then get John to write poems about them? And so I did the one for fall, because I guess it was the fall. It must have been October when I did it. And John very kindly said, oh, I'll give it a try. And then he came back and says, I can't do this. I mean, and I no fault to him. I mean, it wasn't. And then I also thought, what about all the metamorphoses of Zeus? Wouldn't that be fun? But to have a woman write the poems. And I gave it to another good poet friend of mine. Her name is Bernadette Rule. And she came back and says, I can't do this. So I'm still waiting.
He's unsolicited.
Peter Sanger. Try Peter Sanger. He's always working with Thaddeus Salonia from photographs and reverse engineering books, essentially, where
all right,
he's writing about a suite of images. It's possible, but boy, yeah, it's hard work. Dennis Lee and Neufeld, Frank Neufeld had this kind of going on where they used to. There's a great story in Neufeld's autobiography about going to schools and Dennis Lee, getting the kids to throw out things that Frank could draw. So he swung it around on Dennis one day, and that was the end of it. That shut that down. Dennis did not like it.
Who knows?
Anyway,
we have a question here. Just and it's for you, Wesley. Do you ever do faux wood engravings? That is, brush ink drawings for offset printed books.
Yes, and what the faux that I use is called scraper board.
Okay.
And scraper board was invented in the late 1800s, somewhere after the cost of photography came down to a level where it was feasible to use, and it was designed to imitate wood engraving. And I think the original scraper boards were that the clay base, the white part, was so thick that you could actually use your engraving tools on it too. But the calligraphic nature of it is always something that shows up in a scraper board. I've done a lot of scraper board, especially for the commercial world. You know, there's a lot of cookies behind type that were done with scraper board. And I had to tell my agent one time, look at, you know, I like to earn a living, but don't send me any more computer images. I don't want to do another happy computer or a sad computer or a, you know, contemplative computer, all those things. I'm out of that. No more computers for me, thank you. But I do, yes. Scraper board is a good, it gives very much the effect of a wood engraving from the kind of ribbony type of line that you can create on scraper board, that when you're engraving, you can do the same thing. So.
A lot of the illustrations that we use in our trade publications from Wes they start as actual wood engravings, but then they're scanned and printed offset.
That's true.
In the book, or if they're on the jacket, they're scanned and printed as a photopolymer plate, just as backup, right. Because a lot of the papers we use from Saint Armand are not particularly well vetted for, there's grit and things that will destroy a wood engraving in an instant if you're not, because we're printing them dry. So you know, we often, even though we're using modern processes, we are often starting still with Wes's engraving tools and a piece of wood. But the other thing that the first book we did together with John Terpstra, my first book with John Terpstra, we went to Wes to do illustrations, and Wes did a series of sketches or a couple of sketches and sent them.
Pencil drawings,
with the idea of moving on to engravings. And I said, stop. We're going to do the sketches because they made more sense in terms of the way what John was writing about, and which was driving around looking at the Iroquois bar in Hamilton and trying to understand what had gone on in geological time in that space.
Yeah.
And the sketch seemed more honest about you know, note taking and field observation.
I think
so
it was it was a good call on your part there too, because it does make the book, like you say, it's more in keeping with the rumination kind of thing that Andrew's doing. So I should say too that the fishing book called Casting into Mystery that I illustrated and Rob Reed wrote, and then the HarperCollins book by John McLean, they were all engravings, but they're scanned and then printed from the engraving box. But the difference in those two, in that kind of way of working, maybe this is what your questioner is thinking about, is the time frame. Wood engraving takes about 10 times longer for me personally than a scraper board does of the same size. So there are other engravers who work much faster than I do, but so I've been engaged to do a project to have wood engravings, and then after some discussion they say, well, we don't have that much time, can you do them as scraper boards? So I've done it.
Well, did you figure out the project that you had not yet realized or want to achieve?
Well, wasn't there the McMurtry project you wanted to do? Blood Meridian or something? We talked about that years ago. Didn't you want to do it like a graphic novel, Blood Meridian or something, that years ago?
Oh, Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah, McCarthy. Right. Yeah.
Oh boy, now that, talk about a dream job. But I don't think we would ever get permissions to do that. But
we actually sent off some query letters and didn't even get the time of day, you know.
I know you did. You did. Yes. Well, I mean, okay, this is, I don't think Andrew has fielded a few of my soft lobs into his, into the outfield there on this one, but this wordless novel that I'm working on, I kind of think it would be a pretty cool project for Andrew to take on at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. The other one that never happened.
He hasn't seen anything yet, so I wouldn't make him make any promises right now. Don't do anything like that.
That's right. That's right. I say no for a living, Wes. There's no worries. But the other one that never happened, what fish that got away, was you and I were going to do a book with Stuart McLean.
That's right. We were going
to
to
do an Abecedarius with Stuart McLean, and he was all excited about it, and we exchanged some letters. And he got busy, and then he got sick. So
right. That would have been fun. Yeah. No, it's the reason I don't want to I'm trying not to jinx anything here, but what I'm also thinking is I don't want to make pressures or anything, because I said to Andrew a long time ago, I was thinking about looking at, pardon my phone, don't even know where it is. If it's bothering people, I'm sorry. That this wordless novel, there's going to be about 230 engravings in it. And so it's the kind of project that's going to be, I'm going to have to decide that that's my life for 3 years or something like that. And but it's going to be a full novel and I haven't seen a full novel wordless of that size in a long time. Our good friend George Walker, he does sort of biographical novels, like the gentleman who did the lecture on the wordless novels and graphic novels.
Richard Hopkins, yeah.
Richard Hopkins, yes, that was interesting, and he pointed that out too. So it's a little bit different than what George is up to. And I try to keep an eye out. When I was talking to Simon Brett, the British wood engraver, about doing it and my trepidation for taking something on, and he said, "Well, you just got to get your gold sovereign and nail it to the mast, just and get out there and do it." So just mentioning it here, I'm kind of feeling like maybe I've now all I can do is go get a gold sovereign somewhere, wherever I can find one of those.
Now Chester is going to send a pre-order, and you'll be
yeah. Oh, somebody asked us about being in collection. We were talking with Spencer the other day about collecting and so on, and Andrew came up with the idea.
Both admitted to being bad collectors.
Yeah, we're not collectors, but then Andrew said, but actually we collect collectors. That's what we like to have, is a bunch of collectors. Yeah.
Well, I think on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation and answer the questions that came in. This was fantastic to sort of see how it all works and all the various elements that go into it, the sort of friendship around it. I think it's really an inspiration. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, you're most welcome. And I'll speak for myself. If anybody has any further questions that they want to write to me, you can give them my email, and if they have specific something that they would like to know about sharpening or something like that, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Yeah, and same here. And I also just wanted to close by saying that everyone thinks it's about the work, but really it's about the people. It's about the community. Wood engraving in and of its own self, or printing or publishing of its own self, is just noise in the wind. It has to have a context. It has to be, situated in friendships and associations, and needs readers and viewers. And so, my relationship with Wes, which is really my oldest relationship with anybody in the book arts, is so vital. And the number of times we've been on the phone through good and bad things in our lives, happy and sad times. It's just been what holds it all together and gives it purpose.
Yeah, that's what we usually talk about first when we're on the phone.
Yeah,
we talk about family and things, and then whatever the business might be comes up second. Yeah. Thank you very much for hosting this.
Well, it was a pleasure. We will be for those of you who are on the call. We will actually have 2 events in September. So September 30th, It'll be the Clinker Press shavings, which will be a conversation with Andre Chavez of Clinker Press down in the States, with Peter High. And so that's September 30th, 5 p.m. Pacific, which is 8 p.m. Eastern time. And same, it's on Eventbrite and also through our website that you can register for it. So, you know, please join in there. And thank you again, both of you, for taking the time. And thanks everyone for being on the call, and have a good rest of your evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.